Hi, and welcome to Session 2, Personnel Units. We're back to ASL 101. I'm Russ Gifford, and I'm hoping you enjoyed Session 1, and we'll see how it goes today with Session 2. Our goal is that you'll become familiar with the types of counters in ASL games. We already started that a little bit in the last one, but we want you to recognize and understand the different types of counters, the counter symbols, the different types of counters. And we're going to specifically today look at special rules for single-man counters and multi-man counters. My theory is I want you playing the game. We're not going to go through this notch by notch over these sessions. What we are going to do is give you enough information that we can put your fingers on the counters, get these on the board, and give you some understanding when you're reading the book then. We've played a little bit of it and you see, oh, that's how that works. So the goal is we're going to have you playing. Get you playing. That's the whole concept. And just in case you're hearing me talk about MMCs and SMCs, yes, there are a lot of acronyms, as I've said, but let's make it clear. This is a squad. This is a leader, and that is why we call this squad leader. And for the record, those are the MMCs, multi-man counters. We can tell because they've got those little silhouettes that show multiple men on the counter. And the SMCs, the ones with just one man. And we'll see some differences among these with this session. So let's take a look here with personnel units. ASL battles are fought with many different types of counters, and as you can see here, here's a bunch of them just laying around. This module is going to examine specifically infantry units and their leaders. In ASL, we've got half-inch counters is what we're really dealing with this time, and we call them personnel units. These are leaders, heroes, squads, and the squads also have half squads. We also have crews, and we're not going to spend a lot of time with crews. They work very similar to half squads for our purposes to get started. Then there's squad weapons, which are also on half-inch counters, and I'm just going to do a flyby on those so you recognize them. Those are machine guns, anti-tank rifles, mortars, bazookas, etc. And yes, I know there's a lot of acronyms in ASL. Get used to it, otherwise this book would be 10 to 50 pages longer. Now, the guns and vehicles and the armored fighting vehicles, AFVs, are on 5/8" counters, and we're going to get to those a lot later. We're not going to worry about those right now. The game is called Advanced Squad Leader. To heck with the big tanks and stuff, all right? Let's learn how to play the game, then you can learn how to play with the tanks. We looked at some of the information counters last time, and as you can see, they're there. But let's look now at the leaders. Here's an example. We've got the 10-2 leader over here on the left side, and we'll explain in a few minutes what that means. That means he's incredibly good in this game, by the way. And down below, we've got a sergeant and 8-1 sergeant. Now, you know by the colors, these are what? They're Germans, right? Okay, those are. Let's take a look at some examples of squads. There's a 447. That's a first line squad. We can tell it's first line by that box. That's a what? It's Russian, right? They're brown. And here's an example of a first line. Again, we see the one in the upper corner. That's telling us their class. A first line squad for the Germans, a 467. Now let's just for a moment see if we can note a couple of weapon counters here. Right below us, there's that LMG, which stands for light machine gun. You can't see it very well because of the prep fire marker. But we can note in this one, we can't see it any better, but we see that MMG, and that's the medium machine gun for the Germans. Now, as I said, there's two types of personnel counters in ASL games. There's the single man counters, and we recognize those because they only have one silhouette on the counter. These are primarily leaders, although you will occasionally see heroes, and we'll talk a little bit about the difference, but not a lot. And then multi-man counters, and as I said, those are squads, half squads, and crews. And again, we tell which is which by what's the symbol on the counter. Squads have 3 men, half squads have 2 men standing on them, and the counter for crews have 2 men standing on, actually sitting on them, looking like they're working on a mortar or a gun of some sort. Now, Again, one of the reasons we're not going to do a whole lot with crews is because we generally use the crews manning those 5/8 inch counters like guns. All right. A squad generally represents about 10 men trained to work together, and a half squad represents a deployment, is what we call it in ASL, or a casualty where the squad has been reduced, either because they have deployed and split in half or because they have casualty reduced, and we'll talk about that. Let's take a look here. Here's the multi-man counters. As I said, 3 silhouettes. There's that 4, 6, 7, and we can tell it's a first line because it's up in the corner. And there's a 7, 4, 7, and that's green, so it's American, and they have an E, meaning it's an elite squad. And let's go forward. The Infantry Squad, 3 silhouettes, showing us it's a squad. And we have to make sure we understand what the heck these numbers mean. There's 4, 6, 7. Firepower, that's the 4. Normal range, that's the 6. And the all-important morale, which decides whether or not they stick around when they're fighting or whether or not they come back when they've been disrupted. And in this game we call it broken. When they rout, that's the morale. So 4, 6, 7, it's 4 firepower, and we call that FP. Normal range is 6. In this game, you can fire up to twice your normal range. At normal range, you are normal firepower, so that's the 4. At up to twice your range, so in other words, in this unit's case, from 6 to 12, it would be at half firepower, which would be 2. And then the morale, 7. This is the front. As I said, we use the facing to show this squad is in good order. When we flip them over to the back, it's when it's broken. In other words, it's failed a morale check, generally due to enemy fire. When it's broken, the unit can't function until it rallies. In reality, it cannot fire. The only movement it can make is during the rout phase, and it is very vulnerable. It can be captured. It can do all sorts of things bad for you, but nothing good. You can't do anything until it rallies. And just out of curiosity, when do you think the possibility of rally is? Yeah, in the rally. Okay, more notes on the personnel units. Special rules for squads. They have 4 movement factors, and this is just a flyby. Don't get hung up on it. They have 4 movement factors, and that's MF for normal movement. They can double time, we call that CX, for an additional 1 or 2 movement factors. And the 1 or 2 depends on when you declare their CXing. If you declare it before they start moving, they get 2 additional movement factors. If you declare it after they've started moving, after they've expended a movement factor already, then they only get 1 additional movement factor. Now, CX also has problems. Obviously, you're tiring your guys out, so there are problems, and they get a little counter that says CX. Now, squads have an IPC, which is telling you how many portage points of squad weapons they can carry. Notice we're getting into these acronyms already. SW is squad weapons. But squads can carry 3 portage points worth of squad weapons or other types of things. Anything greater than that will reduce their movement factors. Each point they go over, they will reduce their movement factor. So if you had a squad carrying a 4 portage point machine gun, it would obviously only be able to move 3 movement factors, right? Again, we get into movement more heavily later. I just want to fly by on this. Now, same thing with fire. We also get into that later, but squads may fire their inherent firepower. That's that number we saw at the front of the counter, their inherent firepower, and a squad weapon in any phase. Or they may fire 2 squad weapons, but they will forfeit their firepower, their inherent firepower, if they do that. I'm going to say that again. Squads may fire their inherent firepower. In the case of that 4, 6, 7, you could fire 4 factors, and 4 firepower factors, and a squad weapon. So that one unit we saw with a light, he'd be able to fire the light, and he could combine that with his 4, or he could fire the light at one thing, and he could fire his inherent at another. Or he could fire 2 lights, but he'd have to give up his 4 firepower factor for inherent. So that's the limitation. Now, getting into half squads, and I'm just showing you this. They work almost the same way. Notice we got a 337 over here and a 247 over here. I'm kind of thinking you can tell those are half squads. And notice by the class, the one says E, it matches that 747, so this is the half squad that would come from that 747 American. The 247, it's got a 1, and the 1 looks exactly like the one for the 467 squad we looked at. This is the half squad for it. Notice, reduced firepower, range isn't as good, but the morale in this case stays. So, we've got the infantry silhouette. 2 silhouettes mean this is a half squad. And looks like I've got a graphic out of place here. But our firepower is 3. Our normal range is 3. Our morale, 7. Works exactly. And most of the rules for half squads work the same way as well. 4 movement factors still. They didn't get any less able to move. They too can double time for their 1 or 2 additional movement factors. They may fire their inherent firepower or a squad weapon. In other words, they can't fire 2 squad weapons. They cannot fire a squad weapon and their inherent, it's or their inherent firepower. Half squads also still have the ability to carry 3 portage points. Now, these same rules apply to crews also, and I'm not going to get too deeply into crews except to show you them so you know what they are. There's the crew. Notice I'm also showing you the backside in this case. I've got a crew, they're sitting on their haunches working a gun. 227, so I'm sure you know what that means and what back means also. Here's the front. Quick quiz, what's this unit's morale? Hopefully you said 7. What's their firepower? Well, that's pretty easy since both the firepower and the range have the same number, but obviously the first number is our firepower. It's the same order as other MMCs. Firepower, normal range, morale. Now, when crews fail a morale check and break, they do the same as other personnel units. They break. We flip them over. There's the crew on the back. And notice the difference of the back in this case is that they have a box around their morale. And the box around their morale means that they can self-rally. That means they don't have to have a leader to attempt to rally. Special rules. They're highly trained, so we consider them elite units, and that can make a difference in the types of weapons they can use. They have self-rally capacity, as we mentioned. What that means is they don't have to have a leader, but a leader can be used to help them. They are immune to heat of battle and ELR. Neither of those things mean anything to you at this moment, but just stick that in your mind and you'll remember. And now let's look at single man counters. These, the game was called Squad Leader. We've looked at the squads. Let's look at the leaders. And here's a whole bunch of examples. And notice they all have different ratings on them. We've got this 10-3 leader up on the right corner. We've got a 9-2 leader below him. We've got an 8-1 leader. We've got a 9-1 leader. We've got an 8-0 leader. All different levels of quality of. Let's take a look and see what it means. We know it's a single man counter. We know it's a leader from the looks of that counter, and it's got the leader's name. Single silhouette tells us it's a leader or a hero, and we'll get to heroes in a moment, but the leader's name then tells us in this case it's a lieutenant. And as we look through this, the big thing that we care about is his leadership capability. His leadership rating, in this case, is a -1, which is actually a -1, and we use this as a die roll modifier, or DRM. And his morale is his first number. Notice there's no firepower number, right? He has no firepower. He has no inherent firepower of his own. Thus, he has no need for a range, correct? So all we have is morale and his leadership rating, which works as a die roll modifier. And again, if he fails morale check, he's going to be flipped over like a squad would be, so we would consider him broken. This is his back, and we see a box around that morale. What's that telling us? I'm sure you got it right. A box around a broken morale means the unit may self. Let's look at some special rules for leaders so that you understand what their place in this organization is. Leaders affect other units in the same location, and I said that anything in yellow is something you can look up. Location means something specific in ASL. We'll talk about that when we get further on. Some examples, and this is not all of them. If he's with other units, he will prevent their cowering when they fire, and he can also give a movement factor bonus. We talked about squads having 4 movement factors, and that they can CX for 2 additional factors, but if they start stacked with a leader, they can actually get a bonus of 2 movement factors if they stay stacked with him throughout the movement. Now, that leadership value that we saw, leaders use their leadership number, that die roll modifier, to influence other personnel units in their location. So we saw that -1, that 9-1, means he has a -1 die roll modifier. Notice that makes the die rolls lower. So if we're rolling to check morale, it's going to be below that 7 on the 467 unit if we had a 9-1, or it's going to be below the 7 on that 747 American unit with the 9-1 leader we saw here. Now you see why that 10-2 leader became so important, because the other thing that happens for it to work, we said they have to be stacked with them. Well, guess who's going to take the morale check first? The leader. And you notice the leaders have higher morales than the squads. Important, because if they break, we said units that break can't use any of their capabilities. So if the leader were to break, he would not be able to use this die roll modifier to help the squad with him. And just for examples, leaders modify fire attacks, morale checks, task checks, rally attempts, and much more. Now we're going to look at a special type of single man counter. These don't show up in the game all that often, but they are there. They're called heroes. Generally, heroes are generated by heat of battle, and again, we'll get into that later. Notice what's the difference with this. We don't have, in their name, we don't have a lieutenant or sergeant or anything like that, and the big difference, of course, we see that we have 149. We got more numbers there, so let's find out what's happening with these. Heroes are special types. Unlike leaders, they are not a leader. They can be a leader. A leader can become heroic due to heat of battle, but this counter only represents heroes that are generated out of squads. Unlike leaders, they have an inherent firepower. They have an automatic -1 leadership to modify fire, and they can also modify close combat, but most importantly, it's fire. And unlike leaders, they can actually modify things about themselves, their own fire in this case. Let's take a look here. The morale is the 9, the range is 4, firepower is 1. So if you really look at it, if you were to turn this on its side, you would notice it goes firepower, range, morale, just like the squads, right? Okay. Firepower, range, morale, and because we know it's a hero, we know it automatically has a -1, a -1 leadership modifier. Now this is the back side of a hero. This is a special point for heroes. Heroes don't break. Heroes that fail a morale check are wounded instead. If they live, because if you're wounded as a single man counter, you have to take another die roll. If they live, then they have reduced abilities, and notice we've reduced these abilities on the side. 1, they have reduced movement factors. You see that 3 MF up above. Normally a leader has 6 movement factors. Well, he's down to 3. He's reduced morale, which is down to 8, and he's got a reduced range, which is down to 3, but his firepower is still good. Some special rules here for heroes. They use their -1 die roll modifier to affect the fire attacks of other units in the same fire group. So they're a little better than leaders. Leaders can only affect the people they're stacked with. If you've got a hero, he's running up and down the line. He can modify the firepower of a fire group, which means anybody in adjacent locations as well. Heroes are not leaders, thus they're not going to prevent cowering, nor do they give movement factor bonuses. And as I said, when heroes fail a morale check, they casualty reduce, meaning they're wounded and they might die. Let's just take a quick look at some weapons here so you can see them. Here's examples. The green, of course, are Americans. Mortars, medium machine guns, bazookas, and that's a bazooka 45, means it was improved in 1945 over the 44 model. Up on the right, we got mortars, we got light machine guns, we got a demo charge, and we got a heavy machine gun. Notice they all share some similarities. You've also noticed that they all have these letters in the left corner. Those are just identifiers. Those are just identifiers. Don't get hung up on them. Also notice, let's look at the machine guns. The MMG, we can see right by the word squad there. MMG, 3 portage points, a box 2, 4-10. What the heck do all those things mean? Let's see. And with squad weapons, we've got firepower is the first item, and their normal range is the second item. Later we'll get in on all of these, the little dashes, the underlines, things like that. Rate of fire is in a box. That means 1. If we have a 1 on our colored die, this gun can keep firing. If we're firing and we roll like 1-6, 1 being the colored die, so we rolled a 7, but the 1 means it would still be able to fire at full firepower again. And then the unit type, just the name. Now the silhouette just shows us what it looks like. Notice in between, and I didn't mark it, that 1 PP. What do you think that stands for? 1 portage point. So a squad could carry 3 of these, couldn't they? Without it. Then I'm just going to show you the back of these, because obviously they don't take morale checks, but they can break due to usage. When they break, they flip over. They got that white X on the back. This happens to be a mortar that we're seeing on the right, a medium machine gun on the left. They have a repair number, and during the rally phase you can attempt to repair your guns. You roll a single die. If you roll that repair number or less, it's fixed. If you roll the one with the X, that means it is permanently broken. Throw it away. Some notes on weapons, and we call these squad weapons. They have an SW, and I said a squad weapon comes on a 1/2-inch counter, right? The 5/8 inch stuff, those are actually ordnance, guns, vehicles, things like that. So, some notes. The squad weapon must be possessed by the squad to be fired. In other words, they've got to have picked it up or have been given it, and we note that by putting the counter on top of the squad. So stacking is important. And any squad may fire a squad weapon and their inherent firepower. I said this earlier. Or they could fire 2 squad weapons and they have to forfeit their inherent firepower. So it's quiz time. What type of a unit is this? Well, you should have answered that it's German. You should be able to tell me what its firepower, what its range, and what its morale is, right? What type of unit is this? You're going to tell me that's a German 8-1 leader. How about this one? That is obviously a light machine gun, and it's also a German light machine gun, correct? Okay. Well, for further details, I want you to read Section 1, all of it. Should have actually had you read that earlier. I need you to read Section 10.4, Section 10.7 to 10.72, and then I want you to read 15.2 to 15.24. And these are all in the Advanced Squad Leader Rulebook. Coming up in the next session, if you're ready to learn more, well, I have to tell you the heavy lifting is starting in the next section. So before you come back for Session 3, please read Section A 4.0 through A 5.0, and I'd like you to read all of that for me. It's a few pages, and it'll just help us set the stage so that as we start doing these things, hopefully I'll make some of the things you read clear. And then you can go back and reread the details so that you say, oh, now I see what he's talking about. So if you'd read those before we come back, I'll see you at Session 3, Infantry Movement. Thanks a lot. I hope this is working for you. Let me